"You'll never be more than a waiter." My manager laughed as everyone at the staff table joined in. I just smiled quietly and said, "We'll see." What I didn't tell them was, I'd already finalized the deal. The next morning, they walked in and saw me sitting in their boss's chair. The shift had finally ended. The clinking of dishes faded. The smell of grease and grilled meat still lingered in the air, and the exhausted staff gathered around the worn-out break room table for a late-night meal, a ritual of sorts after closing. It was nothing fancy. Some leftover pasta, fries, and lukewarm soda cans. But it was their way of winding down, venting about difficult customers, and sharing a laugh before heading back to their lives. For most, it was routine. For me, it was a daily reminder of how far I still had to go. I was 30, not exactly the age anyone dreams of, still wearing an apron and refilling ketchup bottles. I'd been working at Melvin's Grill for almost 4 years. At first, it was supposed to be temporary, a side job while I figured things out. But time has a way of slipping through your fingers when you're stuck in survival mode. Rent, bills, and reality had a funny way of keeping dreams just out of reach. Tonight, the laughter was louder than usual. The manager, Travis, a smug, loudmouth man with an ego bigger than the grill he pretended to run, was in an unusually good mood. Maybe because tips had been high, or maybe because he loved humiliating others when he was feeling good about himself. He leaned back in his chair, chewing on a toothpick like he owned the place, and scanned the table with his trademark smirk. "You know," he said, pointing his greasy fork in my direction, "I read somewhere that if you're still a waiter at 30, you've basically failed at life." The room went awkwardly silent for half a second, then erupted into laughter. Hesitant from some, cruelly genuine from others. A few of the younger servers chuckled nervously, stealing glances at me. I didn't say anything. I just kept chewing, pretending it didn't sting, pretending the words hadn't pierced deeper than he could ever understand. Travis wasn't done. "I mean, come on, man," he added, shaking his head. "Still waiting tables at your age? You'll never be more than a waiter. Dream less, work more." More laughter. I looked around the table and saw the same expressions I always did. Pity, amusement, indifference. Not one person defended me. Not one person said, "Hey, that's not fair." I guess they didn't want to be the next target. Or maybe they believed him. Maybe they believed I belonged exactly where I was. But I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just smiled, calmly, almost warmly, and said softly, "We'll see." The table went quiet. Travis raised an eyebrow, confused. Maybe he expected me to get defensive. Maybe he wanted me to storm out or lash back. But I didn't. I stood up, threw my napkin on my plate, and walked out of the break room with quiet dignity. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that earlier that very afternoon, I had signed the final documents. A deal I'd been working on for almost 6 months. A deal that would change everything. While Travis was busy mocking me, I was busy buying the restaurant he thought he ruled. I didn't need to argue with him. I didn't need to convince anyone. I just needed time. Because in less than 24 hours, the man who said I'd never be more than a waiter was about to start calling me boss. Not long ago, I had a very different life in mind. There was a time when I believed I'd be running a tech startup by now, not mopping floors in a restaurant that smelled like burnt oil and desperation. I used to dream in code, pitch decks, and venture capital. I wasn't always a waiter. I was once the kid with the big ideas, the one who stayed up all night building apps, reading business books instead of watching Netflix, and pitching business plans to friends who thought I was insane. I dropped out of college in my final year, a decision I now realize was both bold and foolish. I had an idea, a real one, and I truly believed it could change the world. I convinced my best friend to partner with me, poured every cent of my savings into building a prototype, and lived off ramen and Red Bulls for nearly a year. We even got a few meetings with investors, some polite rejections, a few harsh ones, and one that seemed promising. But just when it looked like we might have a shot, my co-founder backed out. Quietly, overnight. He took the code, the idea, and our one shot at funding with him. That betrayal didn't just break my trust, it broke me financially, emotionally, and mentally. I returned home to my small, rented apartment with nothing but regrets and debt collectors on my heels. My parents were disappointed but too tired to say it out loud anymore. My father used to call me his genius son. Now, he just avoided eye contact. My younger brother had just landed a job at a prestigious law firm, and suddenly every family dinner felt like a silent reminder of who had made it, and who hadn't. So I took the first job I could find, waiting tables at Melvin's Grill. Just something to keep the lights on while I figured out what to do next. I told myself it was temporary, just a placeholder. But weeks turned into months, and months into years. And before I knew it, people started associating me with the apron, the tray, and the name tag. They didn't see the ambition beneath the surface. They didn't know about the books I read during my 15-minute breaks, the free online courses I devoured late at night, Or the business podcasts I listened to while washing dishes in the back. Working at Melvin's wasn't glamorous, but it was an education in itself, just not the kind you get from a classroom. I paid close attention to everything: how inventory was handled, which promotions worked, how customers responded to layout and lighting, how a simple smile at the entrance could lead to a higher tip. I studied the way Travis ran the place, not because I admired him, but because I wanted to learn what not to do when I had a place of my own. He was careless, arrogant, and stuck in outdated methods, but his laziness left cracks in the system, and I learned how to fill those cracks. While the others saw a dead-end job, I saw a blueprint. Every night I returned home and jotted down ideas: better menus, smarter shift rotations, loyalty programs, vendor negotiation tactics. Slowly, I started building again. Not an app this time, but a dream rooted in reality. I created a business plan, ran simulations, saved every extra dollar, and began looking for opportunities. And one day, opportunity knocked. The owner of Melvin's, an older man named Carl, mentioned casually that he was thinking about retiring. No one paid much attention, except me. I waited, observed, and over time, approached him privately with a quiet proposal. He was skeptical at first. After all, I was just a waiter. But I had numbers, projections, a vision, and a hunger that couldn't be faked, and that made all the difference. So while Travis laughed at my uniform, and customers overlooked me, I was quietly preparing for the moment when everything would change. They thought I was stuck. I was just getting ready. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that blends into all the others when you're stuck in the grind. The lunch rush had died down, the kitchen was catching its breath, and I had ducked into the hallway near the back office to grab extra napkins. That's when I heard it, a conversation I was never meant to hear. Carl, the owner of Melvin's, was speaking to someone on the phone in his office, the door slightly ajar. His voice was low, almost tired. "I can't keep doing this forever," he said. "My wife wants to move closer to the grandkids. I'm thinking of selling the place. But I don't want to hand it over to some corporate chain. I built this with my bare hands." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as the meaning of his words hit me like a lightning bolt. He was serious. Carl, the same man who'd opened this restaurant 20 years ago and treated it like his firstborn, was thinking of selling. And no one else knew. Not the staff. Not Travis. Especially not Travis. And that was important. Because if Travis knew, he'd probably try to convince Carl to give him a chance. He'd spin some story about loyalty and experience. But I knew the truth. Travis didn't care about the place. He never had. He cared about power, control, and that stupid smirk he wore every time he barked orders at people half his age. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. I went over my business plan again and again, double-checking numbers, projections, and strategy. I'd been refining it for months, updating it with real-time experience from the floor. This was my moment. 2 days later, I approached Carl during closing. The dining area was empty, the lights dimmed, and the last of the staff had clocked out. I asked if we could talk. He looked at me, surprised, but nodded. I sat across from him at booth 4, the same booth where customers had ignored me 100 times before, and laid it all out. My plan, my vision for modernizing the restaurant, improving the menu, upgrading the service, creating a community brand. I even showed him how I planned to finance it through a silent investor I'd been speaking with for weeks, a former customer who believed in me more than I sometimes believed in myself. Carl listened without interrupting. His eyes stayed on me the whole time, not with judgment, but curiosity. When I finished, I sat back and waited. For a laugh. For a dismissal. For him to say, "You're a good kid, but this is way over your head." But instead, he leaned back, folded his arms, and said something I'll never forget. "You know, I always thought you were just quiet. Turns out, you were just focused." My throat tightened. I nodded, unsure what to say. "I'll think about it," he said. The next week was torture. I waited. I worked my shifts like normal. Travis continued being Travis. The others still saw me as background noise. But inside, I was burning with anticipation. And then it came. One quiet morning, before anyone else had arrived, Carl handed me a manila envelope and said, "If you're still serious, it's yours." I opened it. The contract. The terms. The keys to my future. I signed it that same day. No one knew. Not even the staff. Not even Travis. Especially not Travis. I walked out of that meeting holding a secret, one that pulsed in my chest with every step: excitement, fear, a cocktail of emotions I couldn't name. But most of all, it felt like power. Silent, patient, earned. The morning of the reveal felt different. The air seemed sharper. Every movement had weight. I woke up before the sun rose, ironed my best shirt, a deep navy button-down I had reserved for someday. Today was that someday. I wore slacks instead of my usual faded black jeans. Polished shoes, No apron. No notepad tucked into my pocket. I wasn't walking in as the waiter today. I arrived an hour before opening. The lights in the dining room were still off. I walked through the empty restaurant in silence, the echo of my footsteps following me like a drum roll. I headed straight to the owner's office, my office now, and sat in the leather chair I had stared at for 4 years from the other side of the desk. I leaned back, folded my hands over my stomach, and waited. One by one, the staff began trickling in. They noticed something was off. The front door was already unlocked. The lights turned on. A few exchanged confused glances. But the real moment came when Travis walked in, coffee in hand, sunglasses still on like he was walking into a movie set. He paused when he saw me sitting behind the desk. His eyebrows lifted in amused confusion. "What are you doing back here?" he asked, half laughing. "Office is for management, remember? Not your kind." I didn't respond. I just smiled, the same way I had that night at the staff dinner when he'd mocked me in front of everyone. Calm, quiet, measured. He scoffed again. "Seriously, man, you're dressed like you're going to a job interview. You lost or something?" Still, I said nothing. That's when Carl walked in. He looked fresh, relaxed. Retirement already suited him. He held a small stack of papers in one hand, keys in the other. "Morning, Travis," Carl said casually, then nodded toward me. "Glad you're here. I want you to meet your new boss." Travis blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" he said, glancing between us. Carl smiled and handed me the keys. "As of today, I'm stepping down. The restaurant belongs to him now. He's the new owner. Everything's finalized." The silence that followed could have cracked glass. I stood up slowly, turned toward the stunned staff gathering in the hallway, and said evenly, "Thank you all for being here on time. We'll be holding a team meeting in 15 minutes to talk about some upcoming changes. But for now, just know, I'm proud to be working with all of you and leading us forward." A few jaws dropped. One of the junior waiters, Mia, whispered, "No freaking way." The dishwasher actually dropped a plate in the kitchen. Travis, meanwhile, looked like someone had punched the air out of his lungs. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He was pale, quiet for the first time since I'd met him. But you're a waiter," he muttered. I corrected calmly. "Now I own the restaurant. Funny how things work." "Huh?" he stammered. "You can't just..." "Carl, are you serious? He doesn't have experience. He doesn't know how to run this place." Carl shrugged. "He knows more than you think. And more importantly, he cares. That's more than I can say for you." The staff shifted uncomfortably. A few of them nodded in agreement. Others looked down, ashamed they had ever laughed at me, ever believed Travis's version of me. And just like that, the power shifted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Travis stood frozen, grasping for something to say, something to do, but there was nothing left. His words, once sharp and cutting, had lost all weight. His authority vanished in the span of a few sentences. I turned to the team and smiled, this time not out of restraint, but satisfaction. "Let's get to work," I said. And just like that, the waiter he once mocked had taken the seat he never saw coming. The first week was a test, not of business, but of trust. The staff didn't know what to expect. Some were hopeful, some were skeptical. A few still looked at me like I was just playing dress-up. But I wasn't here to prove anything with words. I believed in actions. The first change I made? I called a staff meeting and promoted Mia, the 22-year-old waitress who had never once shown up late, who helped cover other shifts without complaint, and who'd memorized every regular customer's preferences. She became floor supervisor. Then I brought Jamal, the dishwasher, into a full-time kitchen assistant role. He'd quietly filled in for the line cook during busy weekends, never asking for credit, just doing what needed to be done. He almost cried when I handed him the letter. "Travis?" I didn't fire him, not immediately. That would have been too easy. Instead, I reassigned him to inventory and supplier coordination, the role he'd always ignored when he was manager. No staff. No shouting. Just numbers and cold storage. He lasted 3 days before quitting. No goodbye. Just a slammed locker and a bruised ego. With the weight of his toxicity gone, something incredible began to happen. The restaurant started breathing again. I upgraded the pass system, introduced tableside digital ordering, and created a feedback program where customers could rate their experience in 30 seconds. I redesigned the menu, smaller, smarter, focused on quality over quantity. We sourced local ingredients and highlighted staff favorite dishes. Every team member got a say. We launched themed nights, live acoustic Wednesdays, family-style Fridays, and Sunday brunch with free coffee refills. I even started hosting a monthly staff story night, where one employee could share their personal journey with the team. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about connection. And people noticed. Customers who hadn't been in for months returned and stayed longer. Online reviews began flooding in with titles like "New energy at Melvin's" and "Whoever's running this place now, keep it up." Sales climbed steadily. Word of mouth brought in crowds. One food blogger even called us the comeback restaurant of the year. But the biggest transformation wasn't in revenue. It was in culture. The staff smiled more, laughed more, took pride in their work. They suggested ideas instead of just taking orders. There was no fear, only respect. One afternoon, I stood at the edge of the dining room, watching customers enjoy their meals, watching Mia lead the team with a confidence I once only dreamed of having myself. The buzz of clinking plates and warm conversation filled the air, and for the first time in years, I felt full. Not with food, not with power, with purpose. The same restaurant where I was once told I'd never be more than a waiter had become a place of second chances, of dignity, of quiet victories. And the best part? I hadn't become someone else to earn it. I had simply stayed true to who I was, and never stopped building, even when no one was watching. The restaurant had closed for the night. The last table had been cleared, lights dimmed, floors swept. The hum of the city outside was distant, muffled. Inside, it was just me, alone in the office, my office. I leaned back in the same leather chair where, weeks ago, I had waited for the moment everything would change. But tonight, there were no nerves, no secrets, no fear. Just silence, the kind that isn't empty, but earned. I looked around at the framed photos on the wall. Staff Polaroids, a grand reopening flyer, handwritten thank you notes from regulars. One said, "This place feels like home again." I traced the edge of that note with my fingers, and a quiet smile tugged at the corner of my lips. And then, like a quiet wave, the memory returned. That night, the dinner shift, the laughter, Travis's voice slicing through the room like a dull knife. "You'll never be more than a waiter." The way they all chuckled, the heat in my face, the burn in my chest, and how I just smiled and said, "We'll see." I could still hear it, not as a wound anymore, but as a spark. A moment that once felt like an ending, now clearly the beginning. Funny how pain, when carried with patience, turns into power. I thought about Travis sometimes, not with bitterness, just curiosity. Whether he ever told anyone what happened. Whether he understood why things unfolded the way they did. Maybe. Maybe not. But it didn't matter anymore. This office wasn't a throne, or revenge, or some ego monument. It was a place of decisions, of responsibility, of purpose. And most days, that was enough. I stood up, stretched, and glanced once more at the soft light spilling into the hallway. The restaurant was asleep now, and yet, more alive than ever. I walked to the window and looked out at the empty parking lot. The same place where I used to stand during breaks, thinking of escape, dreaming of more, hoping I wouldn't be invisible forever. Now I understood. I was never invisible. I was just underestimated. And that had been my greatest strength. I took a deep breath, savoring the stillness, letting it fill the space where insecurity used to live. No noise, no applause, no need for validation. Just peace. As I turned off the light and stepped out of the office, I paused for one last thought, the kind that stays with you, like a quiet echo in the heart. Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer. And tonight, it had spoken volumes.